Welcome back. This is Daybreak, and thanks for staying with us. The hashtag on X is Citizen Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at CitizenTV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. On my far right is Macharia Njeru, the founding chairperson, a former commissioner with JSC, and an advocate joins us here this morning. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Much appreciated. Elijah Kandiero Tok is Senior Human Rights Officer at the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. Good morning.
Good morning, Ayub.
Lovely having you. Wambua Kituku is the Executive Director, Kituo cha Sheria. Good morning.
Good morning.
Charles Owino is the Director General at the National Communications Center. Good morning, Charles.
Morning to you.
Thank you to you too, and many thanks. Let's begin with you first, Bwana Commissioner. And there's decry on the pressing of the charges using the anti-terrorism law, and the LSK yesterday said this is handing over legitimacy to the judiciary and terms them illegitimate charges. Do you agree with the position by the LSK?
I totally agree with the Law Society of Kenya, because it is becoming clear that what is being used here now is lawfare. Lawfare is a situation whereby you use the law to achieve certain objectives that are not necessarily legal. Because criminal justice system is supposed to be one that is used for the intended purpose. Now, we are seeing a situation whereby starting with the police themselves, then moving to the office of the ODPP, and ultimately the judiciary, the public confidence is winning. To an extent whereby, instruments of law that are supposed to have been used for the correct purpose are now being used, wrongly to achieve actually political objectives. It's a very sad scenario if it's not tamed at this particular point in time. I would say that the system will be sowing wind and reap a whirlwind. Because what will happen ultimately that we'll end up radicalizing this youth, because it's mainly the young people who are being subjected to this kind of situation. Now, what is particularly sad, Ayub, is the fact that starting with the ODPP, there is a process that was set up in 2019, if I may remember. The decision to charge. This is a process, actually. There was stakeholders who are involved in it. And it was agreed that there has to be transparency in the process. There has to be evidentiary tests. There has to be fairness both to the victims and also the accused persons. And I recall that the committee that was set up that came up now with this decision to charge process involved IPOA, it involved the judiciary, it involved the ODPP, members of the civil society. It was subjected to stakeholder engagement. And it's such a transparent process that includes even a form that they have to complete, which is accessible even to the public, strictly stating how they arrive at a decision to charge. All those processes now are being ignored. You can't use prevention for terrorism to charge people for otherwise what is really a protest, offensive at all.
Elijah, how concerning are you as an official at the taxpayer-funded National Commission on Human Rights, given the thread of the tags used in this case by the Ministry of Interior, the Chief Justice herself, and the President to an extent in June last year when he said that the acts that happened were treasonous in nature and no one has been charged since then?
Thank you, Ayub. I would start by saying that from the perspective of the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights is that indeed we are seeing instances where some of the rights that have been guaranteed by our Constitution are actually being limited to the extent to which that it negates the aspirations that are within our Constitution. And I would cite, of course, first of all, the Article 37, where in the past we've seen consistently ways in which this fundamental right for people to express themselves, to assemble, picket, and demonstrate and present petitions being attacked. Then this very provision of our Constitution needs to be safeguarded, that any person has that right to come and freely express themselves and to demonstrate and present petitions. This has to be done in a peaceful manner, and it has to be done in collaboration with other entities. So it is a collective responsibility from both the public who want to express this right and also the other institutions that are working towards protecting and facilitating these rights, such as the National Police Service. And of importance is that when we see human rights defenders and youth who are categorized as a special interest group within our constitution, facing grave and serious charges such as terrorism, then it points to the suppression of this right by individuals who are otherwise expressing their displeasure or their right towards and calling for accountability or better governance systems within our country. I'd like to point out, for instance, in 2014, there were security amendments within our laws. And the Commission, together with other entities, had gone to court to challenge some of the provisions of these amendments that were being made. And some of the key concerns were the nature of how some of the laws were defined in those amendments. They were broad and vague to the extent that it might provide an avenue for its abuse. And targeting, at that point, during that time, there were concerns that some of the provisions might be used to suppress voices of individuals. And at the moment, we are happy because the courts were pronounced themselves up to some of these amendments and called them unconstitutional. And we are still stating as a commission that it is important that this right is upheld and maintained and is facilitated by the state, so that even where there are limits to it, it shouldn't go beyond the actual negating of the right in itself. Okay.
And Charles, coming to you, here is the delicate balance between the protection of life and property and the exercising of rights as Katiba embodies and envisions. How then is this balance becoming, I mean, one that is so concerning to the extent that now entities like the Law Society of Kenya appear to be equally outraged by the extent to which these charges are pressed against Kenyans who have taken to the streets to protest?
Thank you, Ayub. I think I've always said it, that one of the biggest gains we got in the Constitution 2010 was the Chapter 4 on Bills of Rights. And I think what we need to do as a society is to ensure that we are honest with ourselves and that we read some of these laws and regulations as it is. We talk about Article 37 that he has just pronounced, where every person has a right to picket, to assemble, to demonstrate. But none of them wants to pronounce that this must be peaceable and we must not be armed. I don't think the government is interested in stopping anybody from demonstrating, from picketing, from sending petitions. I remember personally, I had a case when we lost lawyer Willie Kimani when he was killed by some officers. And there were serious demonstrations. And I remember at one point I even joined them to have them go to Jogo House when I was still at Vigilance. And they were even pouring things on me. I think it was just provocation, which is normal. And we were laughing and moving together. But what I'm saying is Kenya National Commission on Human Rights is a commission that is funded by government. And I think you need to put a lot of money in education, in educating the public on what is required of them. Because if we encourage a situation where we will be promoting people not to be orderly, because that is why we needed regulations that would be able to operationalize Article 37. And you can see we are still using Chapter 56 laws of Kenya on management of processions, meetings, where you need to at least notify the police and so on and so forth. But now what has happened is that we have seen a lot of demonstrations, a lot of violent demonstrations, to an extent that we went to a level of burning police stations, looting, stealing from supermarkets, burning tires. If you look at the actual definition of the word terror and terrorism, it's simply a calculated use of violence or the threat of violence to instill fear on people. So we cannot say we don't have elements of terrorism on this. But what I can say is the country is ours. Mm-hmm. And we must be very careful, because the youth we have today, if we go back to our history, you remember the years when we were burning schools, the students were burning schools. These are the same boys. And what we need to do is to have a discussion and a talk as a country. Okay. Do we need order as a country? Do we just say that we demonstrate, we picket, we become violent? Because much of these things is not about us, it's about political interests. People fighting for their political space and thinking that they can use shortcuts. So I would want to say that it is important that, because even currently, most politicians, especially those who are not supporting government, they'll tell you that, they'll tell the youth that the police cannot use firearm against you. But they know very well that the Police Service Act, and I'm happy our first chairman for IPOA is here. I've always come here and told you that Mashari Anjeru understood his job as the chairman of IPOA. He realized that IPOA was not meant just to punish officers, but also look at the welfare of officers. Okay. So what I can say is that it is important that we become clear on the circumstances when police officers may be prompted to use firearms, so that we avoid such circumstances and we avoid losing lives.
And Wambua will expound more, and also Commissioner, because the orders ought to come from the hierarchy as the law gives, especially on who is to give the orders, certainly not the CS for Interior, Kipchumba Murkomen, who had made that statement in Kiambu County. But Elijah Wambua, sorry, does this border on abuse, given the history, for instance, of how we had acted, how the security agencies acted when the Security Amendments Bill became an Act of Parliament in 2014, and which was subject to abuse and cases that were documented by the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights? Is it that dark past which is informing the present-day fear that the likes of LSK and the Commission has?
Precisely. I think history is repeating itself. The anxieties that were expressed in 2014 and even in years before are now becoming manifest. I remember when the Prevention of Terrorism Act was being first subjected to public discussion as a bill. There were concerns that were raised by civil society that provisions of that law could be used to stifle liberties and freedoms. And that is now becoming manifest. So the same thing, when that law was being amended in 2014, similar concerns were raised, and now they are becoming manifest. So it's not by accident that what we are seeing now is happening. And it also follows a global trend whereby democracy and rule of law has been receding for the last 15, 20 years or so. And the recession is still going on. And therefore, African leaders are taking advantage of that recession by strengthening their authoritarian rule. And Kenya is no exception. So what we see now is actually part of a global trend. But the bright part of it is that citizen awareness, awakening, and therefore engagement has been on the rise. And the protests that we see in this country, I don't see whether I disagree respectfully with Charles here, that the protests were calculated to intimidate the government. I think the protests are an act of outrage. Citizens are outraged by the policies that are being administered by this government. And therefore, you cannot turn that outrage and make it legally an act of terrorism. In any case, protests are excluded from actions that would legally fit that definition of terrorism if they are conducted in a particular manner. So, so for me, I see this as a part of rolling back of the gains of the 2010 Constitution. Yeah. And I also see this as also another attempt of amending our Constitution by way of implementing the statutory regime, the laws. When a policeman is arresting you, they don't cite the Constitution. They cite either you've broken the Public Order Act, the Police Act, etc., those laws that are below the Constitution. So it's by implementing those laws in a very undemocratic manner that leads to amending our Constitution through extra constitutional ways.
Yeah, Commissioner Njeru, Wambua gives also a context of how this has become subject to global abuse, how President Bush's Afghanistan chapter, after 20 years, nothing to show for it, the Taliban came back to power. Now terror laws were abused in the war on terror. We'll be discussing that to an extent to get the global view as well, and how it's become a self-fulfilled prophecy for strong men in the African continent. But also the act which Charles had cited lists a long list of how then it describes what terror is, results in serious damage to property, involves use of firearms and explosives, release of dangerous biological agent, toxin to the environment, interferes with electronic system, resulting in disruption of provision of communication, financial, transport and other essential services, disruption of the provision of essential emergency services, and prejudices national security and public safety. Is all this clearly outlined? If we are to take the example of Boniface Mwangi, when he appeared in court and certainly the charge was dropped, is it meant for political purpose?
Ayub, I thank you for making reference to that act, and with tremendous respect to my brother Charles. There's no terrorism at all in all these offenses. And I'll give you an example if we even go global. You know, these kind of protests, and violent ones for that matter, are not unique to Kenya. In fact, and I'm not saying that, you know, protests should be violent. It should never be violent. If you compare the protests that happen in other jurisdictions, and I'm talking about Western, you know, developed jurisdictions, in fact, they would make ours a child's play. And I'll give you very specific examples. Like there was somebody called Nahel Mazouk in 2023, a young 17-year-old man who had been killed, arising from a police action. And there were very violent, you know, riots between the month of June and July 2023. Let me give you an idea of what happened during those riots. You have over 800 police officers injured by civilians. You have over 5,500 cars destroyed by civilians. You have property damaged worth about 65 million euros, which is equivalent of about 95 billion Kenya shillings, you know, if you exchange with our currency. You have riots all over France. Now, when you look at those, and this went on for about 2 months, in fact, it was only one civilian who was killed and not directly connected to the police action. Now, if you look at the London riots of 2011, similar thing again that happened, where there were very many riots over the, you know, many cities in London. Again, about 36 billion shillings worth of property destroyed. So many properties destroyed. Police cars destroyed in their thousands. Police officers injured. Not a single person killed. So this narrative about that there's damage to property here in Kenya, that, you know, as a result of that, that you have to kill people. If you compare here, in all these small riots, because I would call them small in comparison to those riots in those developed jurisdictions, you find people being killed in their hundreds. If you look at Sabasaba commemoration on June 25th, already the numbers that we are looking at are in their tens, very many, huge numbers. If you count the numbers of the young people killed last year and this year, is now over 100. That is totally unacceptable. Okay. Now, Charles mentioned about Willie Kimani, 2016. I was in office then. I was still in IPOA. The reason why that would not have happened is because police knew that you used to take action. Charles knows that for us in IPOA, we are very stern. If a police officer committed any atrocity, they would not escape. We would take action. If they were not culpable, we would clear them. Because again, for us, it was a question of law, facts, and evidence. Okay. The reason why you're finding this impunity is because independent institutions are sleeping on their job. IPOA itself has slept on the job. ODPP is being misused. Police know that no action will be taken against them. That's why they are behaving the way they are behaving. During our time, this would not have happened. We would never have allowed it to happen. In fact, we used to have inspectors among IPOA teams that would also work with police. Sometimes whenever there was a demonstration, we would make sure our inspectors were there to also take live, even pictures, and take evidence and take appropriate action. Okay. So this impunity that is reigning in is because we have a rogue political class, we have rogue independent institutions that are not doing their job, and police, it is so disappointing to see a police officer shooting at people, then dancing and jumping, with delirium, feeling that it's like killing people has become a sport. The way you hunt animals is the way they're also hunting young people. Okay. It's wrong.
Yeah. So when we get back from the break, of course, some clarity on then how the protests ought to be. You have talked about the yellow protests in France, the London riots. We had seen also what happened in Los Angeles, but then in our context, how they ought to be with regards to the order that they should follow and how peaceful they should be. We'll be back with more with you, Commissioner Elijah Wambua, and Mr. Director General after the break here on the broadcast. Stay tuned.